I did have a thought though, walking in my kitchen, making coffee. I don't know how I want to frame this. It rhymes with the whole outcomes thing and like what should agile coach like if you're going to be an agile coach, what are you on the hook for? You're delivering something,
Mhm.
or there's really no reason to pay you, especially now that money's not free. Um, Scrum can't be it, can it?
When you say
Why?
Scrum can't be it, what do you mean?
Well, it's like imagine that you were building houses. You had a company that was building houses, and you were hiring somebody who's really good at swinging hammers, right, to put nails into stuff, and they can build walls and stuff. And and then you come along, and then suddenly you got a pneumatic hammer is invented, a pneumatic nail gun is invented.
Oh, the
You
air
get all
nailer.
these, yeah, a pneumatic nailer, and you got people saying, "Well, I don't know, I've spent so much time getting good at swinging a hammer. Like, are we just going to abandon all that hammer swinging?" Right? Mike's
So when you say
concur.
Scrum isn't it, would you when you say it though, are you thinking be all end all one and only tool to fix all the problems?
I'm
That was
thinking,
my
Because in
question.
because
Yeah.
in that state,
yeah,
yeah, I could say that would be a true statement. Scrum is not the one and only true be all end all solution.
yeah,
And it was
yeah.
never
It
meant
can't
to
be the
be.
thing that.
It was a framework. It was
Well,
a,
that's the
it
part.
was a wrapper for taking complex problems and breaking it down to increments and checking your work and maintaining transparency. So,
Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's the part that I'm looking at is the people who, um, or the tendency to conflate the lightweight framework with the thing that we are providing, the value, the ultimate value, the reason for it. Like, because we're going to talk to Klaus Leopold in not too long about flight levels. I'm curious what he's going to say about the team level stuff. Like, is it Scrum? Is it Kanban? Does it really matter? Because I'm hearing a lot of people.
My sense is he's going to say it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
and I think I don't know about you guys, but for me, for the last several years, that's kind of the conclusion I've come to is who cares? Let's just do something that will work. And in some cases, particularly in any given a large organization, it may not be the same. You may have some teams that are better adapted for Kanban, other teams that are better adapted at Scrum, and other teams that are better adapted at something else. And so this fixation on whether it's Scrum or Kanban or whatever else, um, or some scaling model, I would like to think that we are beyond that. And that this, when we talked to Jim the other week, what's next is, yeah, we've thrown off the chains of Scrum. That's not to say that there was anything bad about Scrum or Kanban or anything
Right.
else, but they're just tools. They're just tools in the tool chest, and a good coach should know when to apply the right tool to the right situation. You can't use an air nail or a pneumatic hammer, to use your vernacular, in every situation. There are tight spots where air nailers just, you're not going to get it in there. So you do have to go back to
Mm.
using the good old fashioned Thor hammer.
yeah, and there are
Yeah.
times when the added complexity of hooking up a compressor, running a hose into the space to hang a picture on a wall probably isn't the best solution either. Although I do know
What an
people who
elegant,
would, to be fair.
because they
Because it's
really love that
fun.
framework. Yeah, they're a pneumatic guy.
That's right.
Right. That's what I'm getting
I'm
at.
a pneumatic guy. So I think your statement is true, Jeff. I think to say you hope that we are beyond that, I think, yes, us here,
on this
you
call.
guys,
Mhm.
we are
Yep.
probably beyond just saying, oh, Scrum is the one I would always use, right? But when we come into a client, we're evaluating the type of work they do, and we look at the types of challenges they're facing. it helps to have a starting point, right? So to look at a
Totally.
team and say, well, they do have some uncertainty in what they're doing, so could benefit from frequent inspection. They do have a problem with focus and trying to get stuff to done, so putting them in a time box might help steer that a little or spur that along. So in that case, Scrum would be really helpful. If the work that they do is ever changing,
Maybe there's a dynamic environment.
right? So if they're in a dynamic environment, the things are ever changing, then you'll look more to a Kanban solution. And if they have a little of both, maybe we draw from both decks.
So if you've got a guy who is, or a woman, or if you have a person who is really in love with their nailer, like they spend a lot of time studying the nailer. I know you guys hate analogies, right? Maybe they spend a lot of time and effort becoming a certified pneumatic specialist.
Certified nailer.
And but you're trying to help them sort of see that it's one of the tools, because it's a coaching challenge, right? It's a thing.
Is it?
Well,
Is it? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about what a good coach should have in their arsenal, and their ability to use, the right weapon at the right time. And so I guess in a way, my assumption, and I should probably not assume, if you are calling yourself a coach and you only have one tool in your arsenal,
oh yes.
then are you really a coach?
Well, see, but let me just clarify
Oh,
what I meant.
I see where Mike's okay.
If you've got somebody who's having that and having that, they're stuck on having that one approach as the way that they need to, and you are trying to help them see the problem to be solved as opposed to the tool that they were selected. That's a coaching challenge.
I was going to
Could
say
be.
that earlier in my Agile journey, I didn't call myself an Agile coach. I called myself a Scrum coach because that was the only
Okay.
tool in the
Okay.
arsenal, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I
Okay.
became really good at Scrum and had seen Scrum in a bunch of different environments and applied in a bunch of different ways, I said, okay, I think I understand the ins and outs of Scrum enough that I can advise people into how to apply Scrum. And so at
All right,
first I
that's
called myself a
legit.
Scrum coach. And then I learned about Kanban. I learned about some scaling models. I got to try some of those out. And as I started recognizing the shortcomings of the one pneumatic nailer,
Metaphorically speaking.
Metaphorically speaking, I opened up, I added things to the toolbox. And then I said, okay, now I feel I can advise people in what tool to use at what time. And then I shifted the tone. I said, now I feel I'm more of an Agile coach.
And that's legit. That's legit. I mean, and I think maybe that's the issue, is that when people label themselves something, it's almost a mislabeling. It's honestly, well, not honest.
No, it's an Indeed monster problem. It's like, well, nobody, what are they hiring? I will call myself the thing that is being hired.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the whole accountant thing, where what's 1 + 1. If you're an accountant,
is there a debate
the
on
answer
this?
It's whatever. Oh, hey, if you're a real accountant or a really good accountant, 1 + 1 is whatever you want it to be.
Define good.
That's
in this
interesting.
Context.
Say more.
You've never heard that? Have you ever heard? You've never heard that?
No.
I'm hoping this is a metaphor. It's got to be a metaphor.
No,
so a joke.
Yeah, well, when I was in college, which was a really long time ago, I took a few accounting courses, and the professor said, "Here's the first thing you should learn: as an accountant, the answer to what's 1 plus 1 is not 2. It's whatever you want it to be.
Was this
Oh
an
my
ethics
God.
of accounting course?
Do you know there are
This is
people
a
who
Catholic
wind up in
college,
court
so.
because 1 plus 1 added up to whatever they wanted to be?
Yeah.
Look it
So-
up. Look it up.
So I think I understand where you're coming from, Jeff. You're saying this sort of rhymes with my original thing. It's like it's in how you frame it, right? So it's not a math question. The accountant is making sense of the numbers. Like, is it that level of
Well,
considering? Was that his
making
point?
sense of the numbers, but also recognizing the malleability. You can make 1 plus 1 equal whatever you want it to be. It is not a mathematical question.
Yeah, it's a framing question, or like you're applying.
All right, now let's go. Let's go.
Um,
So maybe there's a metaphor, or maybe there's something we've applied in agile spaces too.
Yeah.
We say that a cross-functional team is capable of more than the individual parts. Like the sum is greater than the whole. So 3 plus 3 or whatever, 3 to 9 plus 3 to 9 is anyway.
plus 2
Yeah.
pizzas.
Plus 2 pieces equals magic.
Yes, exactly.
So what's our philosophy?
So
gonna
the
be?
way
It's
that
whatever
you set
manage
up
to
the
accomplish.
accounting,
Yay.
yeah. Bob
So there, I
Roberts
get
made
it. Agile coaches
The,
are accountants. There.
You're welcome.
But Mike, to your point earlier, I think it's really just a mislabeling, and it all kind of falls into that what you said earlier, Matt, this conflating Scrum or Kanban with Agile.
Hmm.
Those are just little components. Those are just tools in the Agile tool chest.
Mhm. Yeah, it's all got to be focused on some measurable outcomes that make a difference, or it's really none of it's worth anything. I think is the theme that we've been hammering on this.
But I
show
think
for a
we
while.
have to be a little careful in our role as well. It's one thing to advise people on what to use. It's another thing to lambaste, blackball, shut down an entire framework simply because you don't like the framework. It's like, never use a pneumatic nailer. Never ever use it. It's the wrong tool all the time. Never. There's always a better alternative, right?
That's just the other side of that same continuum, right? It's like, always good, always bad. No, you need some discernment as a journeyman. Yeah.
Like there are some scaling frameworks that we collectively are uncomfortable with, but sometimes it can work, and you got to be aware of that.
And the one that you're thinking of, which will go unnamed, it really is, when you pick it apart, it is merely an amalgamation of a bunch of good, solid ideas that were lifted and repackaged. And so there's nothing to poo-poo about the individual components that make up that amalgamation. It's the fact that they've made this big ball of stuff and say, here, this is yours, and give us this much money.
Yeah, it's probably the latter half of that conversation where the ire tends to come up. It's the and pay us lots of money to do this overly complicated thing with you. Sorry, sometimes appropriately complex thing
to maintain the adherence to the approach as opposed to the achievement of the outcomes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it really flies in the face. And I'm not just going to pick on that particular scaling framework because others violate the rule of simplicity. I mean, at the end of the day, the manifesto professes a desire for simplicity.
Yep.
Yeah.
And to all right, here, let's put this on and let's put this on. So you're trying to make it complicated. Why? Because maybe if we add all these different features, and this can go to a product as well, people will see it as attractive and give us more money for it. When in fact, simplicity a lot of times is the answer. But maybe simplicity doesn't sell. I don't know.
Well, so I mean, giant frameworks evolve over time. They actually started in a less complex form in their first iterations, and then after several iterations, more and more was bolted on as exceptions
Mm-hmm.
to the established patterns were discovered. So what do we do with a platform team as opposed to a feature team? What do we do with, something, how do we handle an architectural council? Like they started bolting on these other specialty teams, and whereas they just went, you're right, we could just define a new type of interaction, a new type of team, we'll just add that to the framework. Some of us were in there going, well, what would happen if we didn't just accommodate that new team? What if instead we found a way to make it more integrated, more transparently aligned, more like, could we do that? And there were a lot of organizations that kind of refused to even entertain the question. No, we can't entertain that. No, we can't send those people off to join a cross-functional team. They'll be ridiculous. That would never work. And so we're like, okay, fine, then we need to make an accommodation. But I always felt like in a lot of cases, it was just through lack of trying that we ended up going down those paths. It's like, you know what?
Because we already have the approach and the framework, and we're going to we're more focused on installing that than in considering which part of it is useful.
Yeah, which is why you'd come into a large organization and they go, well, we already have an analog for that, so we don't need to change that. We can keep that exactly the same as it's always been. And and then that was, and from our perspective as coaches in a transformation mindset, we're trying to transform an organization from one way to another, but that organization looks at it and says, but we don't need to change that. Look, it fits. What we already are fits into that model, so we don't need to change it. And that lack of curiosity, even, I think, is what causes a lot of friction in what we try to do.
Yeah, I feel like it comes back to like, what is the impetus for the change in the first place? Like, if the problem is that the organization is assuming too early what they're going to do that will work, right? And they're assuming too early what structure will deliver that without validating it, then there is a big risk that you're just going to take a big thing that's labeled transformation and install it. I would be totally fine with a big framework as long as it was conceived of or thought of as more of a pattern library, right? To say, we'll take this based on what we want to see different in a year, and how we're going to measure that. This part makes sense, this part makes sense, but we don't need a system team, right? And we don't need this Kanban at the either we already know what to do and how to do it, in which case you probably don't need to transform, you need to get better at project management, or you have a series of problems and you need to define the valuable problems and then find a way to iterate towards that, and that probably involves a lot of change. But under no circumstances can you just say, well, in this volatile, uncertain, risky environment, we already know exactly where the left turn is we're going to need to make in 9 months down the road, and where the bridges are going to be out. Like, seems like that's the thing that causes the problem. Anyway.
Yeah, that immutability factor that organizational project management houses lulled themselves into is like, we are capable of making a long-term strategy that takes all risks into account. And we know we can handle it just by having weekly status meetings to make sure none of our risks has manifested. But when they do, let's all panic and we'll start pitching whole chunks of thing out the window just because fire.
Yep.
Maybe there's not a recognition, though, that they are in a volatile, ever changing environment. Maybe there's an assumption that, well, we understand the environment. We know this. We got this. We've strategized and we've got a plan. And if we just stick to that plan,
work the plan.
it'll all work out. When in fact, it's the real issue is the lack of recognition that change is constant. And, the environment is going to change. You can assume that your plan that you baked yesterday is durable for tomorrow and the next day and the next day. But in reality, maybe not. Maybe not. In fact, probably not.
Yeah.
And so that you do have to plan on changing, adjusting, pivoting, whatever. So,
yeah. I think the value in bringing one of those agile hammers to bear is that it does shake up that mindset. It comes in starting with the assumption things are going to change. You need to learn to be comfortable with change. And that step causes enough hand wringing and pearl clutching, right? It's almost like we have to put them through that to get them used to the idea or to admit to the situation. And then we can start trying to find the way to dial it back. I wonder if you wouldn't need to do that if there was another way to bring awareness to the change concept or the cost of the ever-present change instead of having to give them an object
assuming
lesson.
Transformation is totally. Assuming transformation is going to be a valuable thing to pursue. I think that the interesting and the hard work is always like the way people think about it. Like there's inherent risk, like what Jeff was talking about. We have a plan. We're confident in the plan. We will work the plan. There's risk embedded in that, right? And getting people to recognize that and the human factors that work against that. I mean, everybody wants to know what's going to happen.
mm-hmm.
I want to know where I'm going to be in a year so I can plan, right? It's just like your CEOs are people. They have the same tendencies. And so getting an appreciation of like there's risk inherent in deciding too quickly what you're going to do and building in, and instead building in a way so that you can easily adjust. Like that is regardless of what's happening. I mean, yeah, it's just always going to be downstream from that is which nailer to use in your particular context. But it all has to be aimed at that, I think.
Funny that we've kind of touched on the whole transformation thing, and I don't know that every organization necessarily needs transformation.
Right.
That's a different job versus adopting some method that may be under the Agile umbrella. But when we think about, and I've been pondering this for the last week or so, I know that there's a lot of hand wringing and pearl grabbing, as you said, Mike, about the failure of Agile transformations. And as we talked to Jim the other week, he cited, the failure of lean transformations. And he actually cited the whole lean industrial complex and subsequently the Agile industrial complex. But I think there's a common thread of those failures, the collapse, and now there's the finger pointing at why Agile transformations fail. And I think a lot of times we're looking inward. Why is it? What's wrong with Agile? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with Agile? And maybe that's the wrong question, because when you think about it from a more macro level, adopting an Agile, approach, transforming an organization, um, that's large scale change, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we've learned is that I think what is the number I thought I saw not long ago was 75% of transformation initiatives, whether they're agile, lean, whatever. 75% of organizational initiatives, transformational initiatives, fail.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not a matter of, oh, what's wrong with agile? Or, oh, what's wrong with lean? It's not that there's anything wrong with them other than, nothing's perfect. But I think it fails to recognize that they're all about massive change.
Mm.
And so maybe the answer, I don't know, is let's focus more on when we're doing some kind of a transformational effort. Maybe we should be focusing much more on the elements of change leadership
Mm.
instead of, oh, let's just go in and install this, whatever it is, whatever methodology, choose your methodology. Because remember, if it's new to them, that's change. And guess what you're going to get? And the more widespread you try to make that, the more resistance you're going to get. I don't know that a lot of us in the coaching community, and I don't mean us in the small cadre here, um, have a good, they, there may be a good grasp of, Scrum fundamentals, Kanban, whatever, like I said, choose your weapon. But is there a good grasp of change leadership, change management? I know, we used to call it change management. I call it change leadership. Understanding all the factors of massive change in an organization and being willing to apply that. And even having those conversations up front with with leadership to say, if you're talking about a transformation, understand that the key element is not making sure everybody's doing scrum ceremonies or whatever. The key is making sure that the change sticks. And so there's a much greater element of change management, change leadership that is required than just, okay, just go monitor everybody and make sure they're doing their retrospectives and stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
no, that's
Oh, totally. 100%. I think, and when what you're describing is what we talk about when we talk about enterprise coaching, when we talk about coaching agile transformations, the conversation doesn't ever start with what the framework is or what the practices that the work is done in. It's all about how it impacts the system. It's all about how it impacts the individuals, the people, the uncertainty that folks are going to live with. And that's where, those conversations we've had with Marcelo and we and all that, we delved into the team level. We delved into the agile team coach layer, and we never got to the next level, which is where this conversation, right? This conversation about change,
We should pick that up,
change
maybe.
management and all that stuff. That's a higher order calling and a more involved, in-depth thing. Yes, absolutely. A Scrum Master, it says somewhere in the Scrum Guide that they should coach to the organization, right? But it does not provide any tools to do that, right?
Yeah.
All it does is
Just like they
basically
tell you
set a
about your
bunch of Scrum
impediments.
Masters up to sit down in front of a CEO and get, yeah.
And then you're talking to the CEO about Scrum? Like,
right.
that's not
And
gonna work.
the wrong here. hello, general project man. Well, whatever, general contractor. Hello, head general contractor. Here's this really cool hammer that I want your people to be using, and I'm going to demonstrate to you how it can be
When
used.
is the wall going to go up?
When's the wall going to be
Give me a
done?
date for the wall.
Hammer. Look at the hammer. Look how cool the hammer is.
Don't care. Use the screws instead.
Right?
Couldn't care
Yeah,
less. The problem with the agile industrial complex has always been the industrial complex part. Right? There's like a principal agent problem here, right? Where the principal is the person running the organization and they hire the agent, but the problem is the incentives don't necessarily align because the more you can sell, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I've been thinking maybe all us agile coaches, because there was a sense. Tell me if you agree with this. Like, in the 2010s, there was a sense that coaches, scrum masters weren't on the hook for delivery.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we were going to help the organization get better at delivering, but ultimately the organization and the people who work directly for the organization were going to be the ones who had to celebrate the success or mourn the failure when the organization delivered or didn't deliver. And I think that has to change. I'm guessing that everybody who's got agile in their background, like, you're gonna, like, what are you delivering? Like, you should be my guess is that you need to deliver a valuable, measurable increment of an effective system, or otherwise, like, if you're not delivering anything, how am I going to justify that?
I think that's where Marcelo hits his fiduciary responsibility thing. You got to have skin in the game. You got to have.
Right.
You're tied to the outcome somehow. And you're right. In certain situations, that's true. I think, though, it's insufficient just to say that, because once you got skin in the game, then you are as subject to the politics of the situation as everyone else is as well.
100%. You can see why people didn't want to jump in and be on the hook for delivery. It's easy to be on the outside and say, well, that's not what I would recommend. And not be part of the meeting when it doesn't go well.
Yeah. And that's where agile coaching gets really confusing for people, because you have to be sometimes in the game, sometimes out of the game. The longer you're working with a client, and I've been at several clients for a long period of time, and eventually you become part of the furniture. You become so ingrained in the system.
And that's not totally bad. I mean, you want to be like, how am I going to say this? Like, you want to be part of the team. Like, you don't want to be, at a remove from people, right? Like, you're part of the thing that they're trying to push forward.
Yeah, but I'm kind of referring to, like, I was at one client for about 3 years. And by the end of the by the halfway through the second year, I'm like, I'm not saying things that I should say because I know their response. I already know they're going to reject this kind of line of reasoning, even though this is the glaring elephant in the room. This is the thing we should be talking about. They have no appetite to have that conversation. And so I'm just not going to try. I'm not going to go down that path. And at that point, I started feeling I was not being effective anymore, because I was letting things that were obviously glaring errors go. And then I went to the next client and it was like, fresh eyes, fresh outlook, fresh view of the world. Right. And impact all over the place. And it was good.
Yeah.
So
that's tough. I mean, it's not necessarily a coaching thing. Scrum masters get into this too. Like, when the team knows everything that they can know. Right. And it's like, you have to, I don't know. I don't know what you'd say. I think you have to double down there and find a different, because that's the next increment that we're trying to deliver. And so, but I agree that you get stuck in that place. You can get stuck in that place for sure.
I think that's when you become part of the furniture or whatever. You become the furniture. The thing is, and I it's that danger when you're anywhere too long that you become embedded, and you're no longer willing to challenge them, and whether that's falls under the umbrella of mortgage driven development just because, hey, well, I need to,
Yes.
Probably does.
I need this job and I need this check. And so, I'm just going to keep riding this horse. And so you don't do the primary objective of a coach is to challenge people to do better. And that means change. And, you're doing your to, use an analogy with personal training. If somebody's just doing really poorly or they're stuck in a rut, maybe you made some gains and they start to plateau. And if as a coach, if you just let them continue doing the same thing, then you're not doing your duty. So you have to challenge them to do something different. And it's going to be uncomfortable for them, and it may even be uncomfortable for you. And maybe what you're challenging them to do to get off that plateau is even beyond your capabilities.
Yeah, and recognizing
That's
that
the
as well.
self-preservation issue there.
Yeah.
And
But you can maybe reframe that as success, though, like, because I'm not saying you should stay at a client beyond your ability to be effective, but like if the thing you're trying to do is change, there's probably a not an unlimited amount of change that they can engage in, right? Maybe the fact that you've found all the problems, solved them to the best of everyone's ability, is a sign that you've done what you could, what's possible, and then it is time to move on.
Yeah.
Right? As long as we're honest about that, it could be like, well, we started here. This is what we did. We got here. It's not possible for whatever reason. It's not possible to go beyond this. Maybe we have solved all the problems that are solvable, and that's a good thing as opposed to a bad thing, as long as it doesn't, turn into mortgage-driven development.
Yeah, and I mean,
coaching.
basically, most of our customers and clients, they are mortgage-driven, right? They have a career, they've got an investment in that organization, and part of that change management challenge that we face is we're endangering that from their perspective. We're taking the comfortable, complacent path they've been on, and we're disrupting it.
Yeah.
And so, Jeff, you were right. Our role as coaches is to challenge, but it's not challenge for challenge's sake. We're not going in there to just make people feel bad that they can't do a thing, right? It's challenge with a purpose, and it's challenge with an end in mind. And to that, I think we do have a sense of fiduciary responsibility, because we're not, if you go in and you just say, I'm going to go and disrupt all your teams and make them do Scrum because somebody hired me to make you do Scrum, and it's not, and there are coaches who will go in and just keep smacking people with the Scrum stick until everybody is executing Scrum framework the way it was intended by gods, and then
perfectly,
right?
Gods.
And that is not effective. That's not being an effective, responsible individual.
No, if you're just coming in and challenging and not connecting it to why did we do this in the first place? Yeah, it's doomed. It's just heat and not light. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we can't come in and so in that, to that end, I think if you're being responsible stewards with the client and you're challenging them to do things better, you are taking on responsibility for the outcome, right? You have to be. You're not monetarily tied to it. And they'll be very happy to point that out to you. You're not going to reap the benefits from this, right? That's going to be our bonus or lack of bonus that comes at the end of this. Right. Except for the conversation you guys had where you could tie coaching outcomes to remuneration in some way, but that's not the world we live in today.
It would drive greater alignment, wouldn't it, though? Like if you had to put your own,
could,
you're making
but
a
then
bet with your own money.
Are you in danger of doing things just to get the reward?
I guess you could be.
Yeah, that's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
I think fiduciary responsibility is a double-edged sword.
How are you going to, you'd have to frame it in a way that was clear about what we're trying to do and how to measure it, and then make sure the incentives all align, that you couldn't fall into that trap. it's really more about being deliberate in how you start, I guess, right?
Yeah. And when I hear Marcelo talk about a fiduciary responsibility, that's kind of along the lines that I was correlating his comments to. That you know I've got I've got actual skin in the game, financial skin in the game. That's that in my mind, that's what a fiduciary is. And so that I was a little less comfortable with, because as I mentioned before when Matt and I were talking, that's a road to explore, but that's not the world that we live in right now. And so if you think you're going to take a true fiduciary responsibility role, whatever, that has its limits, and it's probably not going to work in the true sense of the word. And so that's kind of where I had a little issue with his reference to fiduciary. But if you mean, hey, I'm on the hook because you're paying me to deliver something, whatever the objective and outcome is, yeah, I get that. I don't know that I would assign the word fiduciary to it, but okay.
Yeah, it depends on how you define. My understanding of fiduciary is that it's a delegation of responsibility. Like if I'm a fiduciary, I have been entrusted to make decisions for you, and I need to put it goes back to the principal agent thing again. Like I'm an agent and I need to keep the interest of the principal foremost in my mind. Like you're trusting me to manage your money, and I have to do that in a way that maximizes your returns and not mine. Right. So this is a thing that happens all over the place, and it's it's a potential conflict, but that's why we talk about I guess, but maybe that's where the concept of fiduciary comes from in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. As a fiduciary, you're not looking out for yourself primarily, or you're not a fiduciary.
Yeah. And
you're something else.
To be fair, Marcelo has settled on a subset of terminology that he's applying in this space. And he's just using those terms now. Whether he's using them in the true Merriam-Webster application of the term, that's the term now, right? And so we're left to interpret what he means by it to a certain extent. And that's where the danger comes in, because anyone who doesn't have the context of the longer conversation is going to take the dictionary definition and say, well, that's ridiculous. No, you're not coming in. We're not giving you financial. No, not happening. Right.
So especially not as a contractor.
Unless you have to.
Should we invite him back?
We still got to have the next chapter of that discussion. I still want to see what he has to say as you go up the ladder into the enterprise level, because he focused entirely on small scale in that conversation.
I'm going to propose that we do that next week.
Anyhow,
what I'm trying to say is it feels like it's been an Agile thing. Am I wrong about that?
I think it certainly has reached the end of its useful time at this point, because I lost the thread. I don't know where we're going. So this must have been an Agile thing, because it starts when it starts and it ends when it ends.
Yeah. Who are you again?
Oh, me? I'm Mike Markey. Yeah. Who are you?
I'm Jeff Singleton.
Yeah. I've been Matt Beam.
And this has been...
And I think we're done. Thanks, everybody.
This Agile thing. Hey, like and subscribe.
Yeah. Ask us for help. We'll totally come help you. We'll be a fiduciary for you.
We'll be happy to...
We'll talk about what that means first.
Yes. Bye. Yes.